Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
The seat taken.
So, Kiernan, we are recording this before the election. So we are either in an incredible mood.
That's right. Yes.
Or we are in a terrible mood.
In the depths of despair.
But right now we are in an undecided. We're optimistic mood, a hopeful mood.
We're hopeful but realistic.
Yes.
We're not out of the woods by any means. God, this is such an innocent time right now. I mean, it's a horrible time because Donald Trump's president, but Donald Trump will still be president when this airs.
Yeah. We can't foresee history, but yeah.
Maybe today is the day he finally becomes president.
Now, during the lame duck, he's really going to turn it around.
Yeah. Yeah. Wouldn't that be insane if it during the lame duck, he was like, Obama is just doing all these great progressive things. Everybody goes, oh my God, where is this guy? All right, Ryan, you've really distracted right off the top. Well, listen, we are in the past praying for the fact that Joe Biden is today the president to be, and that Kamala Harris is the VP. Oh man. Oh, that's going to feel so good.
It's going to be awesome.
But what's also going to be awesome today, Ryan, is the interview that we have with an author. Her name is Kendra Greene. And do you remember the episode that we did on Iceland called Iceland is a Nice Land?
I do. That's a very popular episode.
Very popular episode, quite early in the oeuvre. It was based on the fact that I had just done a big trip to Iceland, really taken with the country, such a distinctive culture, such a harsh environment. Like it's like a brutal rock in the ocean, but really resilient people, and also just beautiful, untamed wilderness. And what this book is about, what Kendra has written about, is it's all about the eccentric museums that dot Iceland. And so the book is called The Museum of Whales You Will Never See and Other Excursion to Iceland's Most Unusual Museums. And I love quirky museums.
You love quirky museums, and the quirkier the place, the more you like the quirky museum. So this must be an extreme.
Quirk turned up to 11.
Are there miniatures?
Fact, the knob is quirky, and you can turn it up to 11.77, and that's what it's at.
And there must be miniatures, I would imagine.
Ryan, I'm sorry to say, this is a new theme that's come into the podcast. Everybody should remember from our Knoxville episode a couple episodes ago, Ryan revealed to the world that he is hugely passionate about miniatures. And we do not talk about any miniature museums on Iceland, but there may well be, because this is a shocking stat, just to give you a teaser. In Iceland, the population is, at the time the book was written, it was 330,000 people, and there are 265 museums. Okay? So that's
wow. How many museums per capita is that?
It's you can do the division, folks, but it is a very, very high number of museums for the size of this population and this island. So she talks about, what is the source of that, and why do people collect, and when does a private collection become a museum? And she uses it very cleverly as a lens to explore the history and culture and geography of Iceland. It is the ultimate book to give somebody who's planning a trip to Iceland.
So does she give you some ideas for your next trip to Iceland?
Oh my gosh, so many ideas. And I asked her to give a hit list. The interview concludes with her giving the listeners a hit list and me a hit list for the best eccentric museums for us to hit up. So, Ryan, it's a thorough interview. It's a bit of a lengthy interview because we really get into it. So I would suggest that we just get right in, take off, and go talk to Kendra Greene.
Yeah, I think it's time to take off.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
My guest today is Kendra Greene, the author of The Museum of Whales You Will Never See and Other Excursions to Iceland's Most Unusual Museums. This is a dream book for me. As our listeners know, I love quirky museums, I love Iceland, I love well-crafted prose, and I love smart cultural and historical analysis. So I could not be more thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining, Kendra.
I'm really glad to be here, Kiernan.
So I think, that the title is very eye-grabbing. as is the cover art. And so let's start there. The Museum of Whales You Will Never See. What is that title about, and how did you come to write this book?
Well, the original title for the book, the working title, was Collections Yet Unknown. So I was thinking about a few things, right? Both this process of how collections end up becoming museums, how a place like Iceland, that at this point has about 360,000 people and pretty close to 300 museums and public collections, which is an astonishing proportion, right? How was that happening, and how did it happen so fast?
Right.
I started researching in 2011, and even at that point, almost every museum I went to had been founded by 2000, 1995 at the earliest. So the title itself is taken from one of the cabinets in the middle of the book, which is actually in the plural there, the Museums of Whales You Will Never See. You will not be surprised to know that Iceland actually has multiple whale museums, one of which I've been to, one of which I've gotten to the door and decided to turn away from, and one of which I've been trying to hunt down for years. I've got the address, I've got the phone number, no one ever picks up. It's an empty field if you follow the address. I don't know what's going on. I'm sure that it exists, but I've never been able to get there.
And, you do a lot of thinking in the book of how collections become museums, where that line is, what is the driver of collecting. But I'm curious, what brought you particularly to Iceland? Is it that you discovered this fact about the vast proliferation of private museums? Or were you interested in the country itself, and then the museum was just a lens into the exploration of its history and culture?
Neither. It's almost crass. I was in graduate school, and there's a travel grant at the University of Iowa to leave the country for at least a month. That's basically the whole stipulation of it. It's open to any graduate student. Mm-hmm. And nonfiction, of course, is a huge umbrella. I felt like I could go anywhere for basically any reason. And yet a couple of years had gone by, and I was running out of chances to apply for this thing. Right? I just wanted money to go somewhere.
Sure.
It seemed really a very helpful friend, the writer Lina Ferreira, sent me what I assume is the first internet list that pops up if you Google like world and museums. It was one of those like 10 wackiest museums in the world list. Mm-hmm. We should all be very proud that 2 of them are domestic, right here in the US, but for my purposes, not useful. And somewhere in the middle was this museum that I'd heard about once from the only Icelander I'd ever known. My sister likes to tell this story differently, right? She likes to talk about how many PhDs need to be in one room to install a kitchen cabinet. Which is to say, I was helping out some of her friends. I don't have the PhD. And I asked Gardar as we were smoothing out these IKEA diagrams about Iceland, right? That I knew that's where he was from. And I realized sort of in a way that embarrassed me that I didn't know anything about the country. And when I asked him what I should know, and Kiernan, I feel like this is another place where like you could step in and mention 10 things we should all know about Iceland right now that would amaze us and endear us to the country.
Sure.
But the one thing this particular Icelander said was, we have a penis museum, the only one in the world. So that was enough for me to click on it when I saw the link on this list. And then, of course, the website was in Icelandic. And as I was searching to see if maybe it was, it seemed like it was a small place, it probably wouldn't be translated. But I found the button to translate it. And it turns out the museum, you could read it in 7 different languages, including Esperanto. And just sort of fell down the rabbit hole from there, thinking about, my goodness, for a place that gets talked about as being strange. If you think about it in the long view, right? If you think about it from a museum perspective, it's almost wildly traditional, right? It's Victorian in its sensibilities, right? It's taking us back to an era of comparative anatomy that is important to the work of Huxley, of Cuvier, of Darwin. And eventually I realized, in my view anyway, it's a museum about language, and what's not to love about that?
Yes, and you jumped right ahead to the penis museum, so we're gonna have to explore
First things
that.
first.
I am curious, given that was the origin, did that make it into the grant application? Is that what you led with?
That is the only thing. I told them I'm going to spend 2 weeks at this museum, and then I'm going to travel for 2 weeks to put it in context.
You'd have to really define what you mean by put it in context. But I understand what you mean, that Victorian sensibility. It's almost that it's almost like a cabinet of curiosities. That term kept coming to my mind as I was reading the book. And your description of what is officially called the Icelandic Phallological Museum, it reminded me a bit of at the University College London, the Grant Museum of Zoology.
Yes.
Had that same sort of sensibility where there's very little order given. It's much more, you're meant to just sort of walk through and take in the variety, and, let certain objects draw you to them as you will. So I'm wondering with the Phallological Museum, and limiting your puns as much as possible, can you share with us the story of this very special and probably fair to say eccentric collection?
They bill themselves as probably the only museum in the world to collect a phallic specimen of every mammal species native to that country.
Right.
And this is a thing that starts entirely by accident. There were multiple points where this did not have to happen. I think it's important to stress that. So the beginning coincidences. Sigurdur Hjartarson was the headmaster of a school in Iceland. And like basically everyone of his generation, right, he's one of those Icelanders who was actually born a Danish citizen just right before World War II. And even to this day, it's really common to spend your summers out in the country, right? You'll go visit the relatives and work the farms. Somebody knew that, one of the parents of one of his students, and no one knows, nobody hazards a guess as to why this happened, but this parent brought in a pizzle, right, this sort of artifact of the country, this sort of moment of nostalgia as a gift to the headmaster. And as you know from reading your Shakespeare, the pizzle is the bull's penis dried into a whip. And it just sat there, right, as anything you don't really know what to do with.
I certainly would not know what to do with that.
Right. You could imagine exactly the moment of saying, thank you, and setting it down and maybe not thinking about it again, not knowing where to file it. And right, that could have been it, except Iceland is one of those places. Sometimes I think of it like when you talk to New Yorkers, and no one is one thing, right? You're an actor / waiter. In Iceland, it's like that, but intensified. As they say, we are so few. So people are used to doing a bunch of different things, right? Mm-hmm. You work at the bank, or you're a politician, or you teach school, but you also have your punk band or your fiber arts practice. You volunteer for the rescue squad, right? You're used to doing all of these things. And a bunch of the teachers in the summer, when they weren't teaching, worked at a whaling station, which gave them special access to the one part of the whale that doesn't get used. Mm-hmm. And there, with 60 kilograms of whale penis, they hauled it into the school and just plopped it, right? Left it on the desk of their boss.
Sure. Right next to the pizzle.
And you know how it is when people get the idea that there's something that you like and you start getting lots of that thing?
Of course, absolutely. For me, it's Theodore Roosevelt paraphernalia.
My sister-in-law has magnets with her name on them. It wasn't ever her idea to collect them, but someone gave one to her and other people saw it and thought, oh, that's what Jenny likes.
Sure. Oh, it's too bad it's Jenny, too. If it was just a little more out there,
Yeah, I'm not going to have this problem, but
yeah.
Jenny has all the refrigerator, right? She's running out of refrigerator at this point.
That suggests that she could start a collection and maybe someday a museum.
And so many things start in the home, right? This place where, right, the family sees it, the neighbors know about it, they tell people they've got someone visiting, they drop by. And it would be really parallel to what happened with the Phallological Museum, right? People started giving specimens to this individual. And really, I think the key is that he was the sort of person that had friends and friends who met at the bar. And it doesn't really matter at that point if your friends are writers and parliamentarians and doing who knows what. Who's going to be able to resist talking about the fact that you have a bunch of penises at home?
Well, and I loved the detail too that no animals were killed specifically to collect the penis for him.
Absolutely not.
So it was like, people would just kind of file this fact that this collection was growing in the back of their heads, and they think, oh, who would really appreciate this penis?
So, right, a mink hunter, a polar bear gets stranded, a whale gets stranded, or you go up to the whaling station. Things were a little bit different, 30 years, 40 years ago. You could just go to the whaling station and ask if they had a little to spare. Usually they would give you whale meat. But if you were specific, right, if you brought the trash bag, if you had someone to help you carry it to the car, they might humor you.
And so what was the experience? What is the experience of going into this museum? Give us a sense of what it looks like. And are there any particular pieces that you found surprising?
And I should mention that this museum it's now on its fourth iteration. I was there in 2011, which was the last summer under the original collector. It was the summer where they finally completed the collecting mission, which is to say they finally had a human specimen. And I think 4 weeks after I was there, they packed up everything. The father handed this museum down to his only son, and it opened again in Reykjavik. And this summer, it then opened it's in a new spot, which obviously I haven't had a chance to see, though they finally added a cafe, I should mention. But in the museum, as I've known it, it's a lot of specimens preserved in fluid. So it's sort of like a series of aquariums, except for the places where it's like a series of trophies, right, mounted to the wall and sticking out. It's not got a lot of context, right? It is exactly what it said it would be, right? This is phallic specimen after phallic specimen after phallic specimen. If you want to know what you're looking at, you have to pick up the guidebook, right? You have to carry the language with you to identify the difference between one whale and another, to know what a porpoise looks like, to identify the very tiny penis bones in hamsters.
And you mentioned that there is in fact a human specimen, but my understanding is it's not as preserved as maybe the donor was dreaming. His penis would live on.
Yeah, I think that if you draft a deed of gift, you have a certain vision of the legacy you expect to be leaving behind. But if another decade transpires, right, it might not be what you thought you were leaving behind. And then if your death occurs in the middle of the night, if somehow people are a little flustered about carrying out this last wish and the preservation isn't done right in a textbook way, I personally didn't recognize it the first time I saw it.
And so I think it's important, the way you've described the history and the physical placement of the museum, it's important to understand the structure of the book is like this. It's not a straightforward chronological travelogue, and it's not, a listing to all of the 200 plus museums throughout the country. And so I'm wondering if you could just describe the approach that you took more broadly to which museums did you want to include here, and which were worthy of the level of detail and investigation that you go into?
Yeah, I definitely arrived in country thinking maybe there was an essay. And I left convinced there definitely was an essay, and went back a couple of years later to see if I could confirm the hunch that there was a full-on book there. there are, of course, so many museums. I haven't finished my collection of visiting all of them yet. I think at best I'm halfway at this point.
Wow.
I know there was an early point where I thought, what if there was just a checklist? What if this book was every museum in Iceland?
Right.
Right. It's tantalizing. You technically could do it. And right, if you had a year to sort of make a point of it, less if this was, right, you just want to step foot and, right, snap a picture, get a coffee in every place you visited. You could knock it out in a summer if you really put your mind to it, right? If you did some planning.
Yeah, it's not that big of an island.
But it seemed like a lot was going to be lost in that sort of encyclopedic approach, that there's so much going on in any one institution that it was worth staying, right? It was worth sitting in the cafe or next to the ticket desk for days or weeks at places that most people were visiting in 20, 30, 60 minutes. So, right, it starts with the museum that started it for me, right? This trying to figure out what on earth the Phallological Museum was and why it existed. And from there, thinking through the places that caught my eye on that putting it in context visit, and listening to the Icelanders, right? If the Phallological is the most famous museum outside of Iceland, right, that gets reported on the most, Petra's stone collection is probably the most beloved and pointed to by the Icelanders, right, within the country.
And I think the stone collection is a great example of how it can begin as a private practice, somebody who just loves taking long walks through the beautiful landscape. And the landscape is such a key feature to understanding Iceland in any way. Anyone who's visited understands how striking it is. And how truly wild it is. And the stone collection accumulated and accumulated until it became this sort of roadside attraction. But it began with just visitors who would stop by to see it. And they wouldn't even charge admission until people started to complain that the one bedroom, the one bathroom in Petra's house wasn't enough for all the people who were coming to see the stone collection.
Yeah, it wasn't enough that there were tour buses and tour buses of people arriving, that there were guides who've been bringing people for a decade. It took somebody complaining about the facilities for them to finally decide, all right, we're willing to charge admission so that we can pay for an expansion. You need facilities, you can pay for them, we'll get them all set up. They're still there and perfectly functional.
And so why don't you, what is the stone collection like? What makes it special?
I think, to me, at the heart of it, what makes it special is that it feels so relatable. It's so easy to imagine ourselves as a person who would do exactly what this collector did. It doesn't seem that hard. Yeah, we could take a walk every day. We could probably pick up something worth noticing about every walk. We have the sense. We know to reach down and pick up the thing that is interesting, right? That calls to us, that catches our eye. And so it's so tempting to read ourselves into it. I think that's a lot of what we see. The remarkable thing that was accomplished seemingly accidentally, right? So inherently, so naturally, so inevitably, it seems that we feel kindred with it, right? We know that impulse, even if basically none of us actually have anything that looks like this. We certainly don't have this trove of geology spilling back up the mountain in the most extensive garden you've ever met, because how are you going to hold all this collection? Thank goodness it can survive outside just fine.
Right. Yeah, it's good that she didn't decide to collect paper mache or something. And I think in the two we've really dug into, the Phallological Museum and the stone collection. You use those collections and you investigate the personalities, the single people who collected and curated these collections. How about we talk about the Herring Era Museum, which to me is much more the story of a particular place in Iceland. So perhaps you could set the scene in the town. You've studied the language more than I have, so perhaps you can help me with the pronunciation.
So we're going to the center north of the country. Siglufjordur is a north-facing fjord. The locals call it the end of the world. And if you arrive there at this point, you've either arrived by boat or through tunnels. So you can appreciate even now how sort of superlatively isolated it must have been in its day. Except if you were thinking about the world in terms of water, in which case it is ideally situated. There's a period in Iceland of the herring swimming by. Herring are really mysterious. It's only in the last, I don't know, maybe 3 years that there's any suggestion that we have the scientific modeling to actually predict what they do. So, right, millennia of human history, kingdoms made, right, the British and Dutch Empire owing huge debts to the herring. And we never really understood, and I arguably still don't, where they go or why they go or what changes their migration routes. But the herring start swimming close to Iceland in 1903. And for about 65 years, there are plenty of herring. The industry builds and builds. The foreign builds come. The domestic fleet builds up. Both of the Icelandic airlines can trace their routes to herring spotting as their initial forays in air travel. Imagine, right, a gold rush centered in almost one place, right? The herring affect lots of towns in Iceland, but this is the nexus of it. This is the heart. Nowhere are they processing more fish, more oil, more meal. And it just ramps up and up and up. So much money is being made. All of these people are coming to work. Artists are coming to paint. There's music in the streets. It's described as this lively, cosmopolitan place. And then the herring peaks, and 2 years later, it's gone entirely. It's just disappeared. That's the language of it, when the herring disappeared.
And the peak was 66, right? 1966. And by 1969, virtually nothing.
Just gone. And if you think, right, it's not that long ago is the thing, right? This huge boon to the Icelandic economy, right? Part of what establishes it as the very secure place that we know it to be now is rooted in all of this fish coming through this one town. So you can imagine the amount of industry that was built up, right? All of the factories, everything that you need to process like that. And for it to suddenly be a ghost town. I mean, not entirely. There were people who never moved away. There were people that lived there all year round. But the seasonal workforce has no reason to come back. And all the employers, right, suddenly have no work to give. I love the fact that in the 1980s, the Siglufjordur Fire Department is known as the best fire department in Iceland because there were all these structures that were getting dangerous, right? All of these abandoned buildings. And so they would burn them. And they got really good at burning them and putting out those fires.
And these structures are things like the boning factories and the salt facilities and all the storage facilities. So it's all of these big industrial hulks that, you know, were the vibrant, the lifeblood of the town. And then just over the years, and especially in the harsh conditions of Iceland, just were totally decimated by the weather and a lack of maintenance.
And never mind the fact that these are all wharfside, right? These are right there on the harbor, and the salt air, right, the salt water are certainly doing no additional favors. In addition to incredible wind, incredible temperature change, there was just if you think about the old structures in Iceland, right, the old turf houses, the way that you make a place to live out of 4 different ways of cutting the sod, and the constant repair that is necessary so it doesn't just fall in on itself. Right? They say that a turf house without maintenance will return to the earth in 4 years. Mm. It sort of echoes that, right? Clearly, all this lumber was going to last longer, but it's a harsh place for something to stay upright without constant attention.
And so where did the museum that stands today, how did it go from this town that was decimated by the loss of herring to having a museum?
And I think you have to think about what it is to live among ruins, right? What that does to you, to be constantly surrounded by the unavoidable fact that a thriving place that you knew is emphatically not that anymore. It's not clear how to bring it back, how to deal with the aftermath. There was a way that it's sort of hard to understand how quickly people forgot what they had because they were so overwhelmed with what they were surrounded with. It was depressing. People wouldn't admit where they were from if they were talking to people from outside. It was really hard on the psyche. And so it seemed like the best thing they could do was just try to burn everything down, tear everything down, right, put that chapter to bed. And there were a couple of people, there were enough people. There was a handful of people in town who just couldn't bear for that to happen. It just seems such a shame to lose the history, to forget that part of who they'd been. And by time there was basically one of the original structures in its entirety that they could save. It was being put to vote to have it demolished. They interceded. They did this cheap, quick action, which was to paint it. Right? They turned it red. They made it so that you couldn't miss it. They reminded everyone in town that it was there and some hint of what it had been. And that was enough to sort of stall things for that building. And it takes a while to gather steam. I think it's so notable that one of the really pivotal parts of this, note that this is a town that in its heyday, right, in its boom years, decided they wanted a museum. They knew that was a thing that this town needed without having any idea what kind of museum it should be. They hired a consultant who came up from Reykjavik and walked around and wrote a report and suggested that probably the fisheries, that would be the thing. So there'd been an idea.
Seems like a fairly obvious suggestion, but sure.
Yeah, although one wonders, right? At this point, there's a music center in town. There's a poetry center that's endeavoring to have every book of Icelandic poetry ever published in one place. Right? There are possibilities. There are other things they could have done. They're known for really adept skiers. They could have gone in that direction. But they went with the big, obvious animating force of the town. And they never made that museum, right? They started collecting for it. And then everything ended. And that all sort of was mothballed and sitting and waiting. But I think it's so notable that they knew they wanted a museum before they knew what the museum would be. And as a few people in town started on a volunteer basis, right, trying to save these structures, trying to save this history, the turning point ends up being they asked an artist, one of the high school teachers, to start painting, to start drawing, to start reminding people of what had been and to give them the vision of what could be. And they took those images and printed 1,000 brochures so that everyone in town, any politician, anyone who could give them a grant, anyone who could possibly be interested in this, would have in their hand something to hold, and they would have a vision of what this place could be next. And that was enough. That did it, or that set everything else in motion for the award-winning 5 giant structures plus an oil drum, and they might be adding another one this year, institution that we have at present.
And what objects do they display there?
They have no shortage of things they will point out to you. They haven't even had a chance to catalog everything. There are still buildings just packed with objects that need their attention, that they need to get to. They collected like it was going out of style, right? They were collecting like they might lose everything if they didn't grab it now. And that's because that was how it was. They were right. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting mode of collecting. I think we see this in archives to a greater extent, sort of generally, this long-term thinking, this faith that somebody's going to come at some point we almost can't imagine them. We don't know exactly why they're going to need this thing, but they're coming, right? In the future, someone might need this, so we should hold on to it for them. And in this rush to gather up the material history before it was gone, before it wasn't an option, it wasn't a selective process. It wasn't thinking about, well, what do we need? Or what does tell the story? Or how rare or important or valuable is this thing? It was aprons and newspapers and the stencils to mark barrel tops, right? It's whole processing factories and their equipment. It's old dormitories and the clothing, the 3-part pots so that you can make the most use of one burner. They held everything they could get their hands on. And it's really only now, maybe the last 5-10 years tops, that they can sort of catch their breath and know that it's working and think about, oh, what is all that?
Right. I mean, it's very interesting because it's, as told from the side of the museum, I also think for those potential donors, you can understand the draw of wanting to take, this part of their family history or their personal history and have it preserved in some way. You gave the example in the book of an apron that still has herring oil, slick on it.
Decades later, yeah.
Decades later. And that person still thinks to pick up the phone and ask the Herring Era Museum, is this something that's of use to you? And it makes me think at this time of year, you often hear about the Smithsonian search for grassroots, one-of-a-kind arts and crafts pieces that are made by regular voters who are going out to support one of the candidates. And each major presidential election, they acquire these things for the permanent Smithsonian collection. And what honor and what, folks kind of fall over themselves to give away their work just for the fact of preservation.
Well, and here I think what we see in Iceland is a very common, if not just deeply human, pretty global instinct we see at this point, right? This desire for things to be remembered, for them to be preserved, for things to matter, for there to be access to them in the future. But Iceland is a one phone book nation, right? Everyone in there by first name.
Right.
So that barrier to entry, to knowing who to call, to get the thing you want or to give the thing that you'd like to give, is just so collapsed, right? That there's, it's almost not a barrier.
And so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, you said you estimate that you have probably visited about half of the 265 museums. And so I'm interested to hear, what is your suggested must-hit eccentric Icelandic museum list?
This feels like being asked to name my favorite child, Kiernan. I don't know that it's a fair question.
All right, so let me frame it this way then. If I'm in Iceland just for 2 weeks, can you give me 5 that, I must go out of my way to make time for in a compressed schedule?
Let's see what we can do. The aforementioned Petra stone collection, if you're out on the east and if you're there in the months before the snow makes it so that you can't visit, it's literally, right, it's a touchstone to this nation. You shouldn't miss it. But you should also have your eyes open to go up north to Hofsós, to the Emigration Center, this series of black harborside buildings telling the story of all of the Icelanders who have left. If you happen to have any Icelandic heritage, these are the people to help you sort that out. But to think about the situations in which it was just so dire, right, that you had not even so many bad winters in a row, but bad summers in a row, that somebody in town would say, all right, that's it, the whole town, we should just go somewhere else. Everyone, we're leaving. Let's go someplace like Greenland. And have someone interrupt, I assume, and say, yeah, no, good idea. But just thinking out loud, as long as we're looking for a change, what if we really made a change? What if we went to Brazil?
Right. Yeah. Maybe not balmy, beautiful, green Greenland.
Exactly. And this is an era where the government of Brazil was looking to colonize, and particularly white colonizers seemed like a great idea. So sure, you're farmers, you can make it here. Give us a little time to work out the paperwork, but we will eventually send a boat for you. So, I feel like that is a story that's illuminating the Museum of Prophecy. The fact that anything like that exists, just to imagine what that could mean, is almost worth it by itself. But to go, there's a good chance that you'll meet one of the two founders there, and if not, you'll meet one of the teenagers that they're training up. You'll be connected to the local sagas, to the stories of this powerful woman and her immense fortune that she's left in the hills, that the right sort of person walking backwards, being silent, and who as a woman might hope to find one of these days. There's so much going on in this moment. Also, you should know how to predict the weather of the winter based on the entrails of the first sheep you slaughter for the season. These are just things that you should know. The Sundry collection, also one of the exquisitely named or exquisitely translated Museums of Iceland, also called the Small Things collection. One of my favorite museum objects anywhere in the world. They've got a few of these old boards, just weathered, many of them whitewashed. That's tactically and sensorially really sort of lovely to begin with, but they are just bristling with antique nails. And as objects, I adore them. But then when you give them their story back, when you think about them as things that we have before us because their collector worked on old houses, saved the bits of old houses to use in other old houses, and that these are things that then didn't find another home, that there were enough of them that we can see them in the museum, but they weren't absolutely needed. They weren't essential. Iceland had hit a moment where it could spare salvage nails is worth thinking about. And I want to send you to the Sea Monster Museum because of all the reasons, because if you're lucky, the woman in town who knits sea monsters for the gift shop has decided to start doing it again because
we could start a grassroots campaign right here.
I think so. We should send postcards. We can start the mail-in campaign. We are coming to this museum, and we are coming for one of the best souvenirs on the island. But we should also go to witness a really rare species of museum, which is the Oral History Museum. I think a lot about the ways that museums fundamentally, I don't know, I think the default thought is about the stuff, that they're storehouses. Possibly storehouses of stolen things, but that it's about the objects themselves. And I think the more you pay attention to the museums, the more sense it makes to sort of shift the taxonomy and think about them as storytelling institutions. That fundamentally, that's what they do. They have the things so that they can tell the stories, The objects are interesting. They are illuminating. They matter. But more often than not, dollars to donuts. What matters is the thing that they remind us of, The fact, the evidence, the idea that they give us access to, that they allow us to believe that it's just so much harder to do without them. So you think of a place like the Sea Monster Museum, which more accurately is maybe translated as the Monster Center. It shouldn't exist, What could they possibly have? What could they ever have to show you?
Right.
Well, I mean, so far, hopefully, they'll have more to show us soon. But the thing that they have are 4,000 oral histories, from all around the island, spanning a huge period of time. They've got the stories. They've got a thing that it would have been really easy to lose.
And do you have any plan? Of course, given the pandemic, not immediate plans. But have you been continuing to research Iceland museums? Do you have some that you're aiming to hit, that you're dreaming of in quarantine?
I have never made it to the Arctic Fox Center. It's never been open when I've been up near Isafjordur. I haven't actually made it to the sea ice exhibition. That's got to be interesting, right?
As somebody who has visited the Ice Museum in London, which is about the history of how ice used to be delivered and kept in central London, yes, it sounds very, very interesting to me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for letting me know about ice delivery museums. This sounds like the time I discovered that the Postal Museum was part of the Smithsonian.
Oh,
what?
Absolutely. Right now, it's right now. We have an interview in the archives with the director of that Smithsonian Museum.
I am so envious. You have no idea.
Well, my last question for you has to be, are you a collector of anything? If there was going to be an Kendra Greene collection, what would it be?
I used to think about this in terms of, if I had a museum, what would the museum be? And I really hope that someone will do this for me and I can just come visit. But I'd really enjoy the meta museum, right? The museum of museums, right? Wall text about wall text, that sort of thing, right? Making us think about, right, the structure and the history and the architecture and how we move through these places and the needs that they serve and how much of them is made up of people who visit them, not just the things that they have. It's sort of my dream, but that's dodging your question because I don't entirely, at this point, I don't have a firm sense of what a collector is. Right, if it's a thing that exists on a spectrum, if it is a wildly different kind of human being. I think a lot about the way Icelanders will talk about families, right? That it's they'll see collecting as almost a hereditary trait, but also they will point out, right, oh, that's the collector. I'm not a collector. I mean, like, yeah, I've got things, I've got interests, but I don't, right, I don't make the cards to remember everything about them, right? I'm not organizing them. I'm not seeking them out in the same way. So I have a sort of complicated relationship of what is collecting? Is it just this, I think, really core human impulse to keep close the things that have meaning for us? Or is it something else? That said, I am loath to let go of correspondence. So, right, the postcard and letter collection seems very likely.
Oh, I love the idea of the Meta Museum. It reminds me of, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, there's an Islamic arts museum, and there's one gallery that is models of the most famous mosques around the world. And so it's a room of mosques. And I could see that you could do models of the most famous museums, the smallest, quirkiest museums, from all around the world. It would be the Meta Museum. I think it's a killer idea.
Right? Wouldn't you listen to the audio tour of audio tours?
Yeah, exactly. You're coming up with podcast ideas left and right here. Well, the book, again, is The Museum of Whales You Will Never See and Other Excursions to Iceland's Most Unusual Museums. Even if you're not a museum person, this is a brilliant way to prepare for a trip to Iceland. If you know somebody who's heading to Iceland, this is absolutely the book that I would recommend.
I couldn't have said it better.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
So I've always wondered how many penises one would have to collect before they could have a museum.
Well, describe collect, because if your memory is the collection, then I think
a world class collection.
Phallological Museum has some competition.
It is funny now that I've heard about this penis museum multiple times in Iceland. So this is not obscure at all in my mind. It's one of the world's greatest museums.
Institutions. I think, don't you have a sign on your apartment door, the Penis Museum, don't you?
The temporary penis museum.
Well, right.
Yeah.
I hope you learned more than just the penis museum. There's a lot more of the interview, but I forget. Have you been to Iceland? You have not, right?
I have not.
Wow,
no,
that's so surprising to me. You got to get there once we get out of this pandemic.
This is a great list of things to do.
Actually, we've talked occasionally about how you and I have not really traveled together that much. An Iceland museum tour would be a great match for us.
Iceland museum tour. We would need a full day at the penis museum. But besides that,
you want to see if they do those sleepovers, like the
overnight at the penis museum.
Of Natural History.
Yeah, they must.
All right. Well, having had that we really say thank you to Kendra Greene. I had a great time discussing the book. Really, really highly recommend. But Ryan, we are here in the last stop. It's the last segment of the show. It's the final segment of the show. It's your favorite segment. It's my favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People segment. And it's when we take a moment to share one thing that we've read, we've listened to, something we bought. Maybe it was a TV show we saw. Anything that fed the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. And it doesn't get much more workaday than working during the day in quarantine. So Ryan, I have to ask you, did you bring a last stop this week?
I did. So in the New York Times last week, there was an article about the rural versus urban travel situations happening right now.
Yeah.
And there is a new study out, a new survey out showing that 42% of Americans are planning to take a domestic leisure trip in the next 6 months. And this is the highest since the pandemic began. So, folks are looking for more rural places to go. Cities are being hit, pretty hard, obviously, because everything that cities are great at, indoor theater and
right.
museums and great dining
together.
Right.
Coughing.
Is not in right now. So, it's something that folks are looking rural. So, that's definitely been something that we have been talking about and exploring over the last several months. And I think that, at least over the next year until we get a vaccine, when everyone has access to a vaccine, this is going to be the case. So, interesting to see what's going to happen over the next 6 months when it comes to travel in the U.S. And, maybe folks will find some hidden gems out there.
Well, I mean, we've really been proponents of getting out there and hiking. Go to state parks, go to national parks. The difficult thing with the national parks is if you're on the East Coast, it can be hard to get to them. Acadia is the one that I got to. But I do think that it's going to be outdoors for a while. And actually, those are ideal and very restorative vacations. So I think that that's the way to go these days.
Totally. We had a great episode on outdoor activities within a drive of New York City earlier in the pandemic. I think probably in the spring we could revisit that because I've gone on a lot of really great hikes and stuff since then. And, we're going to need that for the spring and the summer. We're not out of this yet, Kiernan. No Paris opera.
Yeah, you've actually sparked for me. I think a good episode could be, Boston and its suburbs are very good for outdoor walks. You and I have done a bit of the Freedom Trail together. There's also in the Minuteman National Historic Park that's just outside. It has a lot of history and outdoor. And actually, I very recently was on it because of beautiful fall foliage, and so
I love fall foliage.
Some of these outdoor activities, even close to cities, it can keep you more sane.
Well, I think that you could show me a good time outside of Boston anytime, Kieran.
Well, if you ever came up here, you were so lucky when that pandemic hit. You were due to come up like within a month.
Yeah, I'm coming up in November. After Thanksgiving, I'm gonna pop up. So we'll have to do some
if you get tested, we'll allow you in the house.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about for COVID.
Kiernan, do you have a last stop this week?
Thanks so much for remembering, Ryan. Yes, I do have a last stop this week. Ryan, have you ever heard of a red snapper?
Like the fish?
Thank you. That's all I knew as red snapper as well. But you may recall, I did an episode all about Maine and exploring some of the parks in Maine. And
big hit, Maine.
One, it's vacation land. And one of the details that I kept out of there and I saved for this last stop, I've just been sitting on it, is while we were up there, we socially distanced, met one of Catherine's cousins. and she has grown up going to Maine, and said, "Oh, well, we should go out and get lunch together at one of these hot dog stands."
Right.
And when we got the hot dogs, they were this neon pink, like extremely bright, very unnatural looking pink. And I said, I don't know what this is going on. And she, who was familiar with Maine, said, "Well, these are red snappers." And I said, I don't know what that means. This isn't fish. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, apparently red snappers are a particular type of hot dog that are manufactured and sold all over Maine. And they are these bright red hot dogs. They're made by one company. It's called W.A. Bean and Sons. And for 150 years, they've used red number 40 food dye to make their hot dogs this insane pink. Certainly, I'll have to put it up on at OOO podcast on Instagram. Because
are they good?
Are they good? They taste exactly the same as normal hot dogs. It just has a little color. It's only called a red snapper. It's really more of a pink, but they call it a red snapper because it's got the bright color, and then you bite into it and it snaps. They use a natural lamb casing. And it's a really solid, good hot dog. But
and afterwards, your teeth are just covered in red, like you've been drinking like a glass of non-natural wine. Yeah, unnatural.
No, it does not stain your teeth. I feel like the one purveyor would be pretty pissed if I said that. It makes you look like you have blood all over your teeth. No, it doesn't leave any residue, and they taste very good.
And they're safe. They're as safe as any hot dog.
But if anything, this last stop is more of a warning, which is if you're going to Maine and you stop off at a hot dog stand, don't be surprised if they hand you back this neon radioactive looking hot dog and everybody around you just acts like it's normal because they know that's a Maine red snapper.
No, well, I am sold. I love hot dogs. So I'm,
You're bringing it back to the Penis Museum.
Well, you're the one who's got this always something phallic for your last stop.
All right, Ryan. You're bringing it back to the Bhutan episode.
Yeah.
All right, Ryan. I have to ask you, what are we talking about next week?
So next week we are going to go back to Tennessee, and we're going to talk about Chattanooga, the great city of Chattanooga, and Lookout Mountain, and all that we found to do there. Let me tell you, Chattanooga was a discovery of my trip, and I am excited to share it with y'all.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it, Ryan.
Well, until then, Kiernan, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This is Dakin. Ryan, if you had to start a museum in the way so many of these Iceland people have from all your collections, besides your miniature doll furniture collection, what would you collect and display?
I mean, you could do like a miniature penis museum.
Oh, that's good.
There probably makes sense for it to be in Ireland, but brother.
Jeez.
I kid.